And I'm going to start with workplace. And this question I'm going to pose to all of our panelists. As kind of Andrew said, most of us grew up learning that we had to work twice as hard. We had to be twice as smart. We just had to be better just to receive what our counterparts receive kind of easily. So what I want to know from you guys, is that still relevant today? And more importantly, is that alone enough? Can you want to start? Let's see what's good.
Okay. I suppose I need to turn the
Yeah,
mic
get that.
on.
Right. Now you can turn it
So
on.
can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. In answering your question, Nicole, I do believe it is still very much relevant that we have to work twice as hard in order to accomplish whatever the goals are that we set for ourselves. I don't think, though, that it's strictly anymore just an issue around race. We live in a global society. For a guy like me, that's much older than most of the folks in the room here today, we heard that saying quite a bit growing up, that the only way to succeed is that you were twice as better or twice as good as the next person. But today, I think, living in a global society, we have to make sure that we do everything we can, educationally, financially, physically, spiritually as well, to make sure we achieve the goals that we set for ourselves. So I still think it's very relevant.
Thank you. Anybody else want to join that?
Yeah, I would say, we shouldn't get complacent. We probably ought to just have a mindset that says we need to be twice as good and work twice as hard and be twice as fast. Because if we start thinking there's really a level playing field, then we're going to wind up behind. I mean, if you just look at the human service sector, a sector that you would think would have established a benchmark for equity and inclusion, I mean, you still see, black men as CEOs in very small proportions. And so, that's not even thinking about, the more competitive for-profit sector. So I think across the board, it's wise for us to believe in our hearts and behave in a way that says we've got to be twice as fast. Probably today, given how fast things go, maybe it's 3 or 4 times as fast, so that we don't get left behind. We are still, as black men, an endangered species, and we ought to remember that.
I would come at it from a slightly different way, actually. I think we do have to run twice as hard, and I think it still is relevant. But what I would suggest is that you look at whether or not that's a race you really want to run. Because I was not saying we're out drinking, but that's probably not the right to say. We were at a dinner party. We were talking about different things, and this guy made a comment. This guy's a very successful lawyer in Atlanta. He made the comment that, just kind of reflective on it. He said the most nervous thing in the world is a successful black man. And it kind of chilled the room. And you start to think about it, and whether you want to admit it or not, as a black man with some modicum of success, you are very nervous about a number of different things. So I think one of the things you got to think about is whether or not the race that we classically think about running is the race that you want to run. Is that really how you view success in your life? And if the answer is yes, run twice as hard and get there. If the answer is no, still do what you need to do, but make sure that you have a fulfilled life and make sure you spend the time where you want to spend it and on things that matter to you.
That's a great take on that.
I think for me, and this was a lesson that I learned when we were pitching, right? I would go, we pitched 97 times before our first dollar came into the company. 97 separate investors. And we were working twice as hard. I mean, I would argue I was working 3 or 4 times as hard, but I wasn't good, right? One thing that I had to learn is that although I was working, I had to be good and really learn the business, right? For the 97 that I mentioned, I probably spent 60 conversations not really understanding what I was doing at all. And there were learning lessons in each one of them, but I wasn't preparing in the way that I needed to in order to go in and have a serious conversation with folks. And so a lot of times it's tough to have that conversation when you're working and you're really working, and you're not feeling like you're getting the results that you want. But sometimes you have to be honest with yourself, and that's where I had to get to, that I just was not good. I was not good enough to participate. And so, yeah, it's a slightly pessimistic take on this, but it's true. I mean, we have to work, but we gotta make sure that we couple that with trying to make sure that what we're doing is working smart as well.
I think it's great self-reflection, because, all of us have to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, to your point, am I running the right race? Do I have the right tools, and am I effective in what I'm doing?
I think that,
Is this mic on?
I think that, when it comes to, I think we do have to work twice as hard, not even twice as hard, but as Lou said, 3 times as hard. But also, we have to understand that what are we working for? Are we working just to get in, or are we working to maintain and sustain? And I read recently a study from IPS, I think it's the Independent Policy Studies on the racial wealth gap, and it said that it takes 228 years for blacks to accomplish the same that whites have been accomplishing for years. So that says that I did the math, it's about 79 years, the lifespan here in America. So if you times that times 3, it's about 237, I think. So it's right in there with 228. So that's 3 generations, so that they have a head start on us. So our agenda should not be to just get in, but it should be able to create, build, and maintain that generational wealth. We have more first-time generational wealth owners now than the black community has seen forever. And so now that we're here, we have to make sure that we pass along not just the wealth, but the recipe, the understanding of how to sustain and maintain that, and also pass that along, teach what we learned late, early to our next generation, so that they can keep the ball rolling versus us just trying to work hard just to get in. That way there'll come a time where we can rest when it makes it to other generations.
That's awesome. So speaking about passing along, as I look at you guys' bios, it's clear that you have acquired a great or effective leadership style. So I have a 2-part question. One, was that leadership style natural for you, or did you emulate a leader that you had in your past? And then the second part of that, for those in the room who maybe aren't yet people managers, aren't yet at the level that they think is leadership, what would you tell them about how to be a leader wherever you are, whatever your role is, whatever you're doing, how can you be a leader today? So how did you get the leadership style that you have, and then how do you coach others on that?
They look down here.
Mr. CEO.
We'll make our way back. So it was a combination of some things. Some, it was what I observed throughout my corporate life. I went through AT&T and Texaco and a whole bunch of other schools of business and took a bunch of leadership courses. So I would encourage folks, whatever's available that you can sort of learn, at least from a book perspective, take full advantage of that. And some of it was the observation of people, both those whose leadership styles I admired and wanted to emulate, and those who I thought I wanted to stay as far away from how they behave and what they do as possible. And then, it's trial and error, sort of what works when you're in a team environment. And it's all of those things. And from the standpoint of when you're not a people manager, I think it's really, leadership is about getting things done. It's not always about who you manage, it's about how you within a group can encourage, inspire, and organize the people and the work process for efficiency and impact. And so if you've got great ideas, don't be shy about speaking them up. If you see an issue, raise your hand. If you see people asking for volunteers, be the one who raises his or her hand to do that. Be encouraging. Be somebody that people can count on. And I always tell folks this: if you are here on the ladder, your task is to make the people above you look better. And so do what you can to make the person you report to look better. Look like they know what they're doing, look like they have an impact. I mean, that, at the end of the day, that's your job. And if you succeed in that, then people will see you as a leader, and other opportunities will emerge.
I'll echo many of those thoughts, Milton. And for me, growing up in South Louisiana, I had an opportunity to be in a household where my father was also an entrepreneur, and he was one of 7 boys. And of all of my uncles, several of them had small businesses in the towns in Louisiana. And like you said, I saw some of the great things they did at a paint and body shop, and then I saw some of the terrible things they did in a retail store. So I got a chance to experience both sides of it. And those were great learning lessons coming up. But I also, from a corporate standpoint, had lots of training that helped me to better understand the things I needed to do with the people who I was working with. And I do agree, if you have an opportunity to take any type of leadership course or any type of training that allows you to excel, take advantage of it, do it. And also, don't be afraid to be different. I mean, a lot of ideas that you may have may seem to be challenging in the work environment that you're in, but you know or believe that it's going to help your organization to excel, jump on it, do it, take that leap. The other thing that I would encourage each of you to do, for those of you who are not quite yet people leaders or don't have folks reporting to you, make sure that you network very, very, very strongly. See, did my battery go? Am I still there? Thank you, sir. Come in. Make sure that you network extremely strongly. It's coming back now. It's back. Thanks, Andrew. It's here. But make sure that you do a lot of networking, not only right there with the individuals who you're reporting to, but outside of that area as well. So I'll give for example, I started off in the marketing and sales area. However, I did a lot of work and networking in the manufacturing environment, which led to different opportunities for me in a corporate sector. So I would just encourage those types of things if you're not quite having people who are reporting to you to seek different managerial styles and utilize that in order to go to the places you would like to be inside your companies.
Anybody else want to?
Briefly, I mean, for me, I try to be a passion or values-based leader. I'm trying to be very open with my team about what I care about, why I care about it, and I openly share what those things are, because I have a lot to learn from the gentleman on this stage, but as I'm navigating the ins and outs of my own journey, my belief is that they understand my values and they understand where I'm coming from, at the end of the day, we'll be able to work through a lot of things together. I think on top of that, particularly as an entrepreneur, I don't ask my team to do anything that I'm not willing to do, right? I openly fight against the idea of being some sort of executive. I mean, my title is CEO, but at the end of the day, the folks that work with me, not for me, but really with me, understand that I'm not going to ask them to do an extra hour that I wouldn't do, or for those of you, even if you're not managing people yet, I try to take on my fair share before I ask you to do anything else. And that's led our team, I think, to be particularly close. We all understand, why we do what we do every day.
I think, just to echo what everybody else has said, that I think for me it was nature and nurture. Because at an early age, I was exposed to a lot of entrepreneurship as well. And so it just automatically, it just resonated with me. But also, when we talk about leading, we have to think about it from different perspectives, because even if you're not managing people, you can still be a leader just where you are. And for me, a lot of times when a lot of jobs that I've worked on and companies I work with, it was observed, the leadership from the characters is observed, because when people see that you have a certain character, then you can add value to a place just by the character and the morale that you have. So I think that a lot of times when we think about leading people, we also have to think about leading by example and just not by leading through management.
Awesome.
Yeah, I agree with everything everybody said. I would say I completely agree with Milton. One thing I'd add, as a person, my job is to make my boss look good, but my other job is to make sure people behind me progress. Like, I look at myself as leadership as how many people I promote, how many opportunities I give different people, and that to me is valued leadership. And if somebody hit upon something about don't ask people to do something you wouldn't do for yourself, leadership is not positional. Because we all have bosses that you wouldn't follow across the street, right? Listen, because you know they're dumb, you know they don't know what they're doing. They're not leaders, but they have the position. Leadership is about who you are, values-based, as he mentioned. Values don't change. You are who you are. Values don't change over time. So you have to have the barometer of values, and that's who you are, and that's who you are as a leader. The other thing I would say as a leadership style is that you have to be natural. If you act to be somebody you're not,
Right.
that's not gonna work out for you. You know, except don't be a holler and scream, because that ain't gonna work out for you either. But you have to have your natural place, and I think you lead from that strength, and people will follow behind you. I think the two other things I say is that you have to stay ahead of your craft. Whatever your craft has to be, you have to stay ahead of your craft. And I think the second thing is what you said, is that never ask somebody to do something that you wouldn't do for yourself. And do it yourself and let other people see it, and let them gather around and come with you.
Awesome.
And can I make one more point, and I totally agree with what the panel has said, but I think one thing that good leaders do is they listen. Being a great listener above and below helps you to make sure you can get your points across to the team that you're working with. And I think all too often you think leaders are always espousing something, but we really need to make sure that we're listening to the people who we're working with and working for as well.
Awesome. So I heard, learn all you can learn, be authentic, and listen. Some of the great points for us. So let's shift gears a little bit to family. Andrew mentioned we're going to talk about kind of is the traditional role there. As he mentioned, men have had, at least in our communities, the role of provider. So I'd ask you guys, and I'm going to direct this because I can't have everybody answer all these. So I'm going to direct this one to Derek and Kenny. Should ask you guys.
Is your mic on?
Oh, sorry. Sorry, guys. Is that better? I'm sorry. So we're going to shift to family, and we're going to talk about providing. Men traditionally have been thought of as providers, definitely in our community. And I'd ask for Derek and Kenny, what does that look like? What does provide mean to you, and how does that show up in your life today?
Well, I think the traditional. I'm trying to make sure this comes out right. I think the traditional role for a male is to provide. I think, and I don't want to be sexist, and I'm not going to be sexist, but I will say there's the most difficult person, the person that has the most difficult job to me is a black wife. And I just say that if you are a successful black man married to a woman, she has the most difficult job in the world. Because as a provider, your job is to, at least from my view, your job is to provide opportunity for your family, to make sure that my family is better off than where my parents left me. And that may mean opportunities, experiences, guidance, education, whatever it happens to be, your job is to provide. And that's typically what the male role has been. I think what's interesting of late is that you have so many African American women who are doing so well. And in all candor, I hope y'all don't throw me out the club, but a black man's ego is sometimes very fragile. So black women, particularly wives, have a very difficult job in terms of managing their ego, going out to do a job, and then coming back home to manage the ego. So from a man's perspective, I think you have to be very able to step back into your role, to do what you do well, to let your spouse do what she does well. So for example, for me, it's interesting, after
Your
Keisha...
spouse not that big. Your spouse isn't that busy.
Well, what's funny about it is that after she got elected, I've had people come up and say, well, I'm surprised you still work. And I'm like... and they're dead serious. Now look at us like, dude, I got 4 kids in private school. My wife,
She's a public servant.
right, she's a public servant. It is servitude, trust me, I need to work. But what's interesting about it is that you really, as a male, you really have to back and kind of understand who you are and what you feel comfortable with, and play your part and let your spouse play her part, because each of you has different strengths. And if you kind of stay in your lane and you let her stay in her lane, it tends to work out pretty well.
Well, I would say that yes, it is our role to provide for our families. And I think the traditional role is still in play. But I think what happens a lot is we don't do enough of accentuating the positives and eliminating the negatives in our conversations about the role, especially of African American men and their families. We hear all this, a lot of things that's negative, the numbers are always negative. But as I travel across the country and I sit in a room like this, I see a lot of African American men who have done really wonderful and positive things for their families and providing for them not only financially, but physically, spiritually, mentally, and all the things that it takes in order to help a family to become successful. I think that we need to do more of that type of dialogue in our local circles, in our circles across the country when we talk about what's happening. And I'll say, for example, I can think of many men who are raising young boys and young girls themselves, their families, and you don't hear that story being told. You only hear the story of something that's negative when it comes to African American men. So I just think that in today's society, it's imperative that yes, we as men provide for our families. I think that role does not need to change, and I think we've got to do a better job internally in our own community of talking about all the positive things that happen for African American men and their families.
Thank you for that. And Derek actually shifted into part of the next question, kind of for those of you who are married and have spouses, how have you and your spouse kind of adapted to what was those traditional roles? We talked about, we've been in the decade of Black Girl Magic, right? So we're doing some amazing things. And yes, it's, we're egos that we have to be fragile around, but also how do you, being a successful Black woman, wanting to make sure that your family unit is intact and that everybody's doing their part, how have you and your spouses adapted to what might be a changing role or even keeping the traditional role? And anyone who's married has a spouse that wants to answer that. I think Derek already gave us a little of his take.
I think that it's the same, Derek said, that you have to know your role, and sometimes we can switch roles, like early on, my wife used to cook a lot. And then it got to the point where the children were, adult children. And so it switched. And so I could only boil eggs and hot dogs. But now, I can But it was all about, sometimes it says 50-50, but I think one of the songwriters said sometimes it's 60-40, sometimes it's 70-30. It just depends on what needs to be done. And nobody looks and says, hey, this is your job, just because you're the woman, or this is your job just because you're the man. If something needs to be done, then it has to be done. And so we have to work collectively and find a balance in that to make sure that we keep our marriage, our family, our businesses, and ministries, or whatever our endeavors are, rolling in balance.
I look at, so I got married close to 2 years ago, and I look at it as a partnership. I guess I'm representative of more of this modern way of doing things. And I genuinely wouldn't be here without my wife, so we've dated for a long time, but when I started the business, we were far from traditional because I was more broke than broke. Like I brought in, at one point someone asked me for my tax return and I said it was zero. And she was with me during that period. So I mean the way that we approach things now is that, she has some responsibilities and I have others. I mean I think it's important for me to provide in some sense, but in a lot of ways she provides to our household as well. And we're not very into the traditional roles around things. I don't think she would have me if we took the traditional approach. But I think as long as there is respect in their relationship, and both people have agreed that they're okay with whatever the arrangement is, then I don't know if there's an issue there. But no, I mean I can't go. She has to do that, but or we're going to eat, or sometimes she doesn't, and she'll look at me and say, "Good luck." Yeah, the expectation that I'm going to be well fed every. I don't know if I'm going to eat dinner tonight.
We got dinner.
No, so I don't know. I think as long as respect is there,
statistic that isn't as positive. I read today that in households in the United States with children, for Black households, 57% of them don't have a father active in the household. That translates to 20% for Caucasian households. That's a sobering statistic. And I asked two questions, kind of how did we get here? How do you think we got here? And what do we do to change the trajectory of that so that we have more intact families and that young boys see, a lot of you talked about seeing your father and seeing him being entrepreneurs and seeing things. How do we replicate that today?
How we got there, you know, this is generations. This is historic. This is justice related. This is economic, social, political oppression that has underlies all of this. Those are not new statistics. They may be on a slightly upward trajectory, but our community has always struggled. You know, how do we solve it? How do we solve having more Black men in prison than we have in college? How do we solve for young Black boys being expelled from pre-kindergarten at higher rates than their white counterparts? How do we solve for all of these things? It's about sort of community mobilization. It's about our commitment. It's about our will as a people to take responsibility in the ways that Frederick Douglass and Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X and everyone that you can think of said we need to do that. We can't, you know, there's no Superman that we ought to wait for to come and sort of fix this. You know, Black Panther's not going to come and solve it. You know, this is going to be each one of us being a leader, being responsible, being a right role model, being a visible and passionate and committed citizen in the world. And it's about voting out fools like Representative Spencer, who feels like he got tricked into something. He got tricked into revealing who he was. That's what he got tricked into doing. But those are folks that are sort of in political positions, making decisions on things that affect all of us. We've got a lot of targets. We've got a lot of things that we need to do. And we know we have a lot of mirrors we need to look into and see the person on the other side as responsible for how things change.
Yes, ma'am.
Just make sure it's on. Yeah. I guess I get real passionate about that. Having grown up one of four boys, and I mentioned to you guys earlier about my father and seeing my uncles. And I watched them, each one of them, work with not only their children, but with other children in the community. And I've tried to do my darndest. My father will be 82 Christmas Day this year, and he's still doing that till this day. And what I want to do in my life, with my life, is to make sure that just a little bit of me that he's instilled in me is shared with the next young man or young lady that I have a chance to witness to share and provide experiences to. And I think, as you said, it's incumbent upon each one of us in this room, each one of us to look at ourselves and say, what can we do for that little boy or that little girl who doesn't have a man or doesn't have a parent at the home? What can we do? That's how you change it. How we got here, in my opinion, it's relevant, but the most relevant fact is what do we do to change it? And we have to look inside of ourselves and say, what have I done this day, whether it's at my church, at my school, at my job, with somebody that we can help make a difference in their lives. And each one of us have the wherewithal to do that. So I believe it can change. To answer that part of your question, yes, I believe it can change. And I think that the answer sits here in the seats that we have in a room like this.
I agree. Those are sobering statistics, and as Lou said, that we have been aware of it, but I think we have to address it more, again, on a personal level, on a community level. How we got here, it's interesting that, because I've done some research on it too, but I use military terms to kind of explain how we got here, because there are men who are out of position. Some are MIA, some are AWOL, and some are POW. And if you look at it, those that are missing in action are those that just are deadbeat dads. They just refuse to take responsibility for their children, their families, and their futures. And those who are AWOL are just absent without leave. You know, for whatever reason, they allow life to pull them away from the things that really matter. Because it's vitally important for a man to be inside of the home, not only to be the protective provider, but the problem solver. Because we solve problems not by being reactive, but by being proactive, by being involved and active in the home. Because there are plenty of men who are at home, but they're not at home. You know, they are there presently, but they're not actively involved. And that's one of the things. I have one son, and one of the things I pride myself on is making sure that I teach him early what I learned late. Making sure that he has the tools that he needs to be successful. And so that and not only just teaching him, but that he sees me doing what I'm telling him. I'm not just telling him, but I'm showing him. I'm leading by example. And to force it to find a solution, again, it lies within us. Most black men have never seen a real man. And because they aspire to be rappers, trappers, and athletes. And so by aspiring to be that, they think that those guys are real men. Not to say that all of them are not, but when they have the wrong narrative, you know, because if they continue to look at these guys who are out in the community selling dope and promoting this negative stereotype, and if that's all they see, then that's what they gravitate to, because you can't be anything that you haven't seen. And so we have to be the black men. We have to stand up and be the real man that not only our children and our family see, but that the community sees us involved, mentoring, coaching, volunteering, getting involved in the lives of other black men to help them to see a real man, so that they can see that. Because a lot of times we think that real men are just people of leadership, and that's not always the case. We can tell that by right now with who's in the White House. Because even on that same note, even when I was younger, before I knew any better, I idolized, in a sense, Donald Trump, but it was from the sense of he was a business mogul. And so that was something to aspire to. But now when you peel back the layers and you see, you know, raw and live, that this is not the representation of a real man. So we have to be responsible for making sure that we are involved in the life of our children and the men in our community, the boys in our community, to make sure that we're doing a good job.
Awesome, thanks so much for that. And one other question, kind of in the family vein. So in February of this year, I adopted a daughter. And I specifically requested a girl child because I didn't think I was equipped to raise an African-American boy in today's climate. And speaking about, I'm talking about the climate with police officers and all of the pool, you know, was it Pool Patrol Paul and Barbecue Becky's, and everyone who seems to want to attack everything that we do. I just didn't feel like I was equipped to raise a boy child. So I ask you, how do you cope yourselves in this environment? And for those of you who have sons or even boys that you mentor, how do you prepare them to deal, I hate to say it, to live to fight another day, because unfortunately the wrong choice could be life or death in some of these situations. Whoever wants to jump in and start with that.
I have four kids, 3 sons, a 16-year-old, a 10-year-old, and my youngest is a 7-year-old twin. And all 4 of my kids are adopted, so congratulations. I think it's interesting. We always talk about black men, and my focus, if you notice, a lot of things I talk about, I try to include black women as well. So we always talk about the problems for black men and black boys. Each one of those men is a son of some other. He has a sister, he has a wife, he has a daughter. And all those things are important. And the thing that I try to instill in my sons, is that when they go out into the world, they cannot afford to make the same mistakes that the white boy his age can make. because nobody's gonna look at him, and I'm just using that Jim. Nobody's gonna look at little Jimmy and say Jimmy's, excuse my language, is an F-up, okay? Because they're gonna look at Jimmy and say, I remember when I was like Jimmy, and I turned out okay. So what Jimmy does is gonna be excused. When they look at Lance, Langston, and Lennox, my three kids, they think of the guy they see on the news. They think of the guy who's at the corner liquor store.
That's right.
And that's who they see. So I have to try to instill in them every single day, every time I see them, how important it is to be positive, how important it is to make consistently good decisions. You can't make 3 good decisions and 1 stupid decision, because that stupid decision could be the one that costs you your life. So I try to tell them every time making consistently good decisions. I try to tell them to always be aware of the circumstances. And I hate to say, you always have to respect authority, whether it's justified or not. You come back to fight another day. You don't fight people who are empowered by the state to do things. That's not a fight you can win. So you always live to fight another day to your point. So you all, from my perspective, every single day I see them, I tell them I love them. Every single day I see them, I apologize for that.
No apology.
I apologize for that because 4 years ago, my nephew was killed in gang violence. He was a victim of a mistake in the So every time I hear this, I think about it. So, I actually have a notice I avoid this. So I tell them every day that, where you are matters, who you're with matters, what you say matters. There are people out there that don't respect your life. People out there that will kill you because you look at them the wrong way. And I tell them always to, don't fight a fight that's not worth fighting. And I'll leave it.
That's great. I too, I have a son, and my son is 24 years old. And I had a chance while he was, from the time he was 6 to the time he was 17 years old, to coach him and 12 other young men in AAU basketball. And we took the approach of, you shouldn't be crying up here, man, you get me all teary. We had 12 to 15 boys that we coached, and we took them all over the country. And it was more than just basketball. It was showcasing them to meet individuals like yourselves. It was taking them to universities. It was taking them to a country club so that they could learn how to play a round of golf. It was taking them to a fencing match so that they could experience something different. It was having them take their first plane trips. And this wasn't sponsored by any shoe company. This was money that was basically done by a few families to make sure that all of these boys were African-American boys, and all of them, most of them did not know who their fathers were. And we actually had one whose father was a Super Bowl MVP in Doug Williams. So we had a plethora of young men who we had a chance to try and affect their lives. What was interesting, and that's why I said you got me all shook up here, the kid who's the best athlete, I lost him 3 years ago. And I lost him because the young man drowned. And he drowned, and he was one of the best athletes in the country playing basketball at Vanderbilt and the University of Indianapolis. And you look back and you say, what can you do to help these young men? And what can we do as fathers and as people here in this room to help educate them, to give them the experiences that they need so that their lives can be respected? And I think the only thing we can do, I believe in prayer. I believe in leading my life that way. And I try to make sure that those moral values are instilled in our kids. My son today, as I was telling Terry before we got up here, has just signed a 2-way contract with the Toronto Raptors with the NBA. And we're going through some things with the team in Turkey right now. And I told, he asked me, he said, Dad, you know, if I was a white player, would I be going through this right now? And I said, son, I don't know. I said, but what I do know is that you're a black player who has an opportunity. And you need to make sure that you focus on the next steps and getting through this hurdle to the next phase in life. So my point in going back to what you said is all we can do, and it's incumbent upon each one of us in the room, I'll say it again, just a little bit, and we're speaking about young boys here, just a little bit for African American boys, whatever we can do. The last point I'll make, and I'll be quiet on this subject, this past Christmas, we talked about small churches, and we hosted an event, and it was for Best Academy, which many of you guys know in the room. I think Tim Jones heads up that school here in Atlanta. And we wanted to do what we could for the young men who are attending that school. Not from a corporate perspective, but from our family's perspective. And so I encourage each one of you, that's how we change those lives of those young men. That's how we make a difference in the families that don't have a male presence in it today, is giving a little bit of ourselves there.
Briefly, I mean, so I struggle with this topic. I don't have any children. To me, I think it's important to acknowledge the systemic way that a bunch of different things are working against us as black men. Right? I mean, we have to acknowledge it. It's true. At this point, it's settled to everyone except for Donald Trump.
Right.
With that said, being black is one of the best things about me, right? And so, I choose not to look at my blackness as a burden. And I think it's possible to look at these systemic issues, right, and know there are problems. But I think a lot of times when we spend the way that we frame the issue and look at it, we come out of the conversation feeling like, okay, because that exists, being black equals burden.
Right.
And I think that's dangerous, right? I mean, we have to, I mean, Lord knows, I've been pulled over by the police in Atlanta, in DC, and it's a terrifying experience each and every time it's happened. I do wonder if I will live after every single one of those encounters. But what doesn't happen after that is me saying, oh man, you know, and I don't think we articulate this directly, but I think implicitly there's this feeling, well, you know, being a black man, being a black kid, boy, whatever you want to use is some sort of a burden, and I just can't get there. I mean, I think one of the most scary things to a system is watching a bunch of black men that have pride about still being black, although there are things that I don't know. I mean, I've chosen recently to articulate more of that. And again, I'm going to acknowledge, I mean, please don't hear what I'm saying here that I don't see the systemic stuff, because I do. It is super real. But my answer to that is, look, that's like my superpower. Being black is like core to who I am, and if you get anywhere close to taking that away from me, then I don't know really who I am after that. So I think we have to have some pride and teach young men and men in general that it's okay to do both, acknowledge it, and still have pride in who they are.
So what I would add is, because I've got two young men, neither one of them would let me call them a boy anymore. And my youngest one just last week was going to go run around the neighborhood, and I said, make sure you have your license, so that when the cop pulls you over, you can tell him where you live, because he's been stopped walking up our steps and asked to prove that he lived there. But I think it's us finding a way to give all the things that we received. Love. Somebody told us we mattered, and they were going to do whatever they could to protect us and to guide us and to send us all the places where we needed to go. A sense of affiliation. You know, you wanted to belong. Each one of us wanted to belong. And somehow we found places and people with whom we could belong, whether it was family, folks in the neighborhood, folks in college, wherever. It's about a sense of belonging. And every kid that you know who's ever gone the wrong way has been searching for love and searching for some sense of affiliation. It's an opportunity. Each one of us has had some number of opportunities that landed us where we are now. And we are hopeful that there are going to be more opportunities that make their way to us. How do we ensure that every one of these young boys, every one of these young girls has an opportunity to do and to be whoever they choose to be, and the freedom and the sense of efficacy that they can be empowered to be their best self whenever they decide to show up? I mean, it's all about how do we create the kinds of environments that were the things that somehow, and even if not from our parents, somehow from the people that we connected with, gave us the most important things that every human being is searching for. And all the experiments that show you what happens when you raise a monkey with a mechanical monkey as opposed to a flesh and living and breathing monkey shows what happens when there's no nurturing and there's no affection, there's no sense of affiliation and no sense of love. And we've got young people who are being exposed in tremendous numbers to none of those things. And then we got to deal with the systemic stuff that Ryan talked about. I mean, it's out there, but first and foremost, you know, let's do what we can, put our arms around somebody and let them know they got somebody to talk to, somebody who cares about them, and somebody's going to kick their behind if they don't do what they're supposed to do. Mrs. Smith or whoever it was who was sitting in the neighborhood who kept you all in line, you know, we need to be that person for somebody else.
So we have time for one last question from me, and then we're going to open it up for audience. And I actually want to make this be a call to action. So this is for Milton specifically. At a Coal Society board meeting, you mentioned that Clayton County was one of the most underserved communities in the city of Atlanta. And Clayton County, we know, looks a lot like us in this room. So I'd ask you, what could you say to us collectively as these two organizations, and then individually as the people in the room, what are the tactical things we can do to make a difference in that community?
You know, the biggest, so Clayton County, so United Way sort of created this child well-being index. So we measured by zip code how well children are faring against 14 different indicators. So I mentioned my neighborhood. I live in Ansley. The child well-being score for Ansley is 90. That means your kids are born on third base. They're sort of heading home. The child well-being score in Clayton County is 32, which means the kids are outside of a ballpark they don't even know exists, wishing they could play a game that they don't know the rules. It's a community in which philanthropy doesn't show up, that there aren't a whole lot of well-entrenched and successful nonprofit organizations. So the thing that we need to do is start showing up. You know, the United Board has said we're going to invest more there than ever before. We're going to show up. It's about showing up for those young kids in, Principal for a Day program. You know, they're sitting in the school, they're sitting there waiting for somebody who looks like us to sit in front of them and read a story. Are we going to show up and do that? It's something simple like that. Are we going to be a mentor to a child who's looking for a man or a woman against whom they can model their behavior and sort of figure out what their future needs to look like? We got to show up for that. You know, when the church calls and says we're doing a community event, we got to show up for that. When this organization says we're going down to distribute food, we need to show up for that. It is all about those of us who've got, all of those nice cars that I passed coming, out of the parking lot. All of us, who are doing real well and, we smelling ourselves. We need to show up to somebody who's looking for somebody who's just going to say, I care enough to be here, and I'm going to show up for you.
Awesome, thanks for that. Let's give our panelists a round.